much for that introduction. And I know a session just after lunch is probably not the best time to be attentive, but I hope the topic is interesting enough, and with the panelists with the knowledge are going to make it very interesting and engaging. So let me turn over to Dr. Pavan Duggal. Doc, can you please tell us a bit about AI legal liability and liability of AI service providers in the context of generative AI output?
It was day before last night at about 11:30 in the night, and I was supposed to be giving an opinion to one of the premier medical institutions on DPDP Act. So I said, okay, let me go to the most favorite child of today, Chat GPT 4.0, and ask them some fundamental questions on the DPDP Act. And lo and behold, it started giving me answers that I could not believe, because those answers were completely off the mark, had no connection whatsoever with what the law was saying, but the confidence with which these said answers were being given actually was enough to fox anyone. I think this is the latest example to tell us that, look, guys, the technology is moving very quickly. Day before yesterday, China and France have now signed a new memorandum of understanding to collaborate on AI. But the fact is, when everybody is talking about AI, what happens if AI starts vomiting false information or, as we say, hallucinated content? Right now, there is no clarity in the world at large, right? Yes, you do find lawyers being fined $5,000 because they used ChatGPT for generating written arguments which had false cases, but there is no liability for the company yet who is actually giving you this stuff. And I think very quickly, I believe that the process that's going to go on is going towards more of responsibility and accountability. I look at the law in New York on AI, and I find the focus is very clear. They want auditing as a de facto basis for minimizing bias or description. I go to the Chinese generative AI law, which came into effect on 15th of August, 2023, and they are very, very clear. Should you come out with anything as part of your output of generative AI, you will be responsible. There'll be fines imposed upon you. There'll be disciplinary action, and even there could be criminal action apart from blacklisting you in the Chinese context. I look at the European Union's AI Act, and I find that they have still not very much gone in the particular direction. So right now, it's still work in progress. It's going to be a great technology. OpenAI has said, I'm coming up with a new search engine that's going to overtake Google in the next few weeks. Now, that's what the stuff is happening. The focus is, how do we deal from a legal policy and regulatory standpoint on the legal liability of AI service providers and the liability specifically for output? Now, traditionally, I advise a number of these players in India, and they are saying, guys, consider it as a good luck that we are giving you stuff. But please understand, we are not going to be liable. Why? Because in India, we want to come under the statutory exemption from legal liability under Section 79 of the Information Technology Act 2000. Little do they realize that they haven't even gone ahead and read Section 21W of the Information Technology Act 2000, which is saying that for you being an intermediary, you will have to ensure that there's no editorial control. Now, when you are a generative AI, you are generating content. Yes, you say, I don't know what I generate. What your prompt is will determine what I generate. Fantastic. But does that mean there is no training at your end? Clearly, no. Does that mean that every data that you are getting collected with each particular search or query, are you not using it? Look at the terms and conditions, look at the privacy policy. They say, by and large, whatever you are sharing with me on my generative AI platform, I will be using it for training. So when they are using these entire exercises, I believe it will be very hard for AI service providers to really keep on successfully arguing that they are intermediaries under the Information Technology Act 2000. And of course, if there's going to come out with output which is wrong, which is hallucinated, which is false, or which is malicious, the question is that small disclaimer that we can make mistakes, be careful. Is that enough? I don't think that's going to be enough. So very quickly, I expect in the later months of this year, far more, very quicker legal developments to take place on affixing more liability on service providers who are providing AI platforms for the purposes of making them more accountable. Now, it's a bigger issue altogether. How will you actually enforce this? Because globally, there's no one law or treaty on artificial intelligence. There's not even any law on cyber per se. So in a scenario like this, it will still be dependent on the national laws in respective countries who will be deciding what will be the legal liability. Now, considering the fact that it's only a handful of nations that have now come up with some laws on AI, there is a list of about 32 laws that have been passed. The fact remains is none of these laws have still gone ahead in the particular direction of legal liability. And how do we deal with this particular story that's come from Costa Rica? In Costa Rica, in a municipal corporation, a municipal corporator proposes a law, a bill. The bill gets debated, passed by the corporation, and then becomes law. 2 months after it has become law, the corporator has now disclosed, I did not write the law, I got ChatGPT to write the law. And that's put the entire corporation in a big tizzy. So the question will be, the liability will be a very, very ticklish issue to be determining. There are no crystal clear answers. But yes, you can't say that I've created a black box, you use it at your peril, but whatever comes out of it, don't make me responsible. That unilateral argument, I don't think is going to be facing much kind of a support from various stakeholders. But how this law will develop will also be very, very crucial. And it's hard for me to predict. A lot of people are saying, hold on, let's still rely upon the traditional law of torts for making them liable. But the fact also is, in the traditional law of torts, we are primarily dealing with duties of humans. For that, I still have to come back to the fundamental question, can we consider artificial intelligence as a legal entity? Can AI be sued? Can AI sue someone else? And number two, what happens when AI commits a crime? Recently, we're doing a matter where AI has been used for the purposes of doing a criminal activity. And that criminal activity has caused wrongful loss to the affected person. Now, we are able to reach out to the algorithm, but we don't know who's the person who's done that. So clearly, there'll be need for determining principles for ascertaining criminal liability, for ascertaining civil liability, and this is work in progress. And till such time that happens, the only guarding mantra will have to be that we will have to be more cautious, more careful, more duly diligent when we are using this. It's like the new toy that has been created for adults. We are fascinated by this new toy, but very quickly we'll have to start realizing that any use or misuse of the toy in violation of expected community standards could potentially be exposing stakeholders to legal liability. What? Not yet clear. Does that mean no liability? I'm not definitely saying that. Does that mean let's do whatever we want to do and wait till such time new law comes up? Not a problem. I think you are actually playing with fire at your own risk. And now with the Hanuman AI being launched in India, which is actually giving you generative AI in 20 different Indian languages, you have problems that are going to be very much complicated and confounded from legal liability. So I'm going to give a command to Hanuman saying, look, give me this particular output in this particular language. And I don't know that language, and that language comes out as an output. I rely upon that. And lo and behold, it could either contain stuff which is in violation of the law, or could be potentially obscene or defamatory or whatever. Can I be made liable? So clearly, there will have to be rules for determining the liability of users of generative AI at one hand. There will be need for developing the legal liability of service providers who are either providing these Gen AI services or who have actually gone ahead and coded. Now, the fundamental question finally that comes up for consideration is, can the coder say, I did nothing, don't make me responsible? Hold on, it's the coder who wrote the code. So can the coder say, I'm off responsibility? I'm personally of the opinion the coder will never be able to wash away his hands of legal responsibility, but the laws will have to keep on developing. We'll have to wait and see how things happen, but very interesting times. But till such time that happens, caution, care, due diligence will have to be a mantra. Don't expect that you can sue an AI today and be successful, because AI is still not a legal entity. Don't expect you can sue a company behind an AI. Yes, there are oodles of litigations in the US against the OpenAIs, the Microsofts, the Googles of the world. But most of that is only limited to infringement of copyright. They are saying, guys, we are the owners or we are the authors of original literary works. You guys have trained your AI algorithms on my works. That's tantamounting to copyright infringement. Please pay me damages. But while all this is happening, something is coming from Japan, which is leaving the entire world dumbfolded. Japan is saying, sorry, if you are an AI algorithm and you are training yourself on copyrighted works, we don't see that as an infringement of copyright. We are seeing that as fair use. So the entire jurisprudence around infringement of copyright, fair use in the context of AI is being turned upside down. Very interesting to see how things happen in the coming times. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pavan. As very informative and very interesting. And I believe that things like ChatGPT, we have just scratched the surface. There's a lot more to come. I didn't personally know about Hanuman, very informative. And as you were talking, I had a lot of questions in my mind, but I'll hold my horses because of the paucity of time. Maybe after the session, I need to talk to you. But thank you so much for your insights. Yes, changing gears now and moving on to the topic of sustainability laws. We have Nawneet here. Nawneet, I have two questions for you. So the part one is, how do you see the relationship between innovation and regulation from an environmental perspective in India? The second part is, what is it that the industry and government could do better to foster innovation and reap its benefits?
Thank you. And so I think to answer your question, the first question, innovation pretty much should drive regulation the way I see it. Because what is happening, unfortunately, is, and you'd agree, if you're talking about waste management, especially plastic waste and a whole lot of things, the regulation is actually kind of driving innovation. And that is where the problem starts. Because many a times, and if you take the example, any example, for example, if you take the example of managing plastic waste, for example, and there's something we often talk about is, biodegradable plastic or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, my understanding is, if it's something which is biodegradable, it cannot be plastic. Because the very reason, if you see the chemical composition, as also mentioned in the regulation itself, the rules and the statute and all of that, of course, the plastic waste rules, it clearly is something which cannot be biodegradable by the very nature of it. So the unfortunate bit is you'll have a whole lot of people, talking about it. They'll come to the lawyers. They'll say, what is this? What is it that we should be doing? And see, I tell them very clearly that, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a scientist. And the idea simply is, if this is, and whatever little science I studied till class 12th and chemistry, I understand that if this is the substance which is kind of required and this is what makes plastic, then it clearly cannot be biodegradable. So all I'm trying to say is that, I think there is some thought which has to go into this kind of policy making. There is some thought which also kind of, and I think, forget that. Also, there's a whole lot of requirement where you have to have these, the companies have to have these certification from the urban local bodies. And then you kind of go and submit what you're doing in terms of your, extended producer responsibility and all of that, EPR goals and all of that. Now, for a company which actually has operations across the country, if you expect them to actually go to each of these urban local bodies and kind of, collect this on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, it's just not practically possible.
The infrastructure is not there.
The infrastructure is not there, and that also kind of leads to a whole lot of corruption. It breeds corruption. So something of this sort, this kind of requirement coming from the Central Pollution Control Board, and this is something which I'm saying this from experience because I've actually represented a whole lot of companies before the CPCB in matters like these. All I'm trying to say is that, when people come up with these kind of requirements or, come up with these kind of regulations, they should actually kind of give some thought to it. Now, the reason I say is because innovation actually should drive regulation. Is, for example, this was one part with respect to regulation bit. Now, what really comes to my mind if you're talking about innovation, I think there is a whole lot of stuff which is happening right now and which also needs to be promoted. For example, if you're talking about, say, conservation. Now, I've done a matter before the Supreme Court where, it was a, with due respect, you have a whole lot of activists also which come to the Supreme Court with all kinds of environmental issues. And this was for a company, of course, I don't want to name. They're building a 100-key hotel somewhere in Uttarakhand. And the concern was that, they've actually cut a whole lot of trees. And what we actually did was we got these satellite images through some website and all of that. And, so we were actually successful to show that, through this satellite imagery, you can actually have this green cover. And which clearly showed that no trees were cut. And, say a couple of years before or later, we showed those images. And of course, we kind of, got away with it. But there are also challenges to it. Because, and I say this because this is off the record, that, because a 4-meter or 2-meter shrub also will look like a green cover or a canopy from the top. It need not necessarily be a fully grown tree. So there are ways in which, if I, as a lawyer, and if anyone is a little smart, you can actually use technology to your advantage, and also that may not be the best thing for the environment. Now that actually gives a lot of scope in terms of, how technology can be utilized for the betterment of the environment, because so that was of course one stray example, but if you're talking about depleting forest cover, for example, now I think we are somewhere, the state of India's forests report, if you see every year they claim 23% or whatever. The reality I'm pretty sure is less than 20%, because a whole lot of green cover which does not really qualify as a tree is also being counted as green cover. And at least when I was in school, I would always study that India's forest cover or green cover is 30% or 33% is of course the requirement. But you can use a whole lot of technology to kind of ensure that you kind of promote conservation, green cover, air quality monitoring system, water quality monitoring system. There's a whole lot of stuff which is happening with respect to, whole lot of discussion with respect to electric mobility. Now, one of the things we can actually kind of, and I'm sure that, and to answer your second question on that, the government is actually promoting a whole lot of startups, where they want to kind of also promote startups which are actually coming up with brilliant innovations in the area of environment conservation, sustainability, and all of that. So my simple point is that I think where we really need to kind of be a little more innovative and a little more patient is, I think first we have to have the right kind of innovation. We have to see if that is actually feasible. We have to see, as what are its pros and cons over a certain period of time, and then kind of frame our regulations in a manner, because then it'll be a more, I think, well thought, sustainable kind of a lawmaking. And I think it's also good because then you also kind of have had some kind of consultation with the industry bodies, and they kind of agree with the idea, buy the idea, and they are like, they're on the same page. Because what really happens is you come up with a regulation first, and then you have the industry bodies going to the CPCB and the MOEF and giving representations, and that really doesn't serve the purpose. So I very sincerely feel that when it comes to environment or sustainability, there is a lot that can be done in a country like India. And I think we have the right kind of talent which actually is capable of coming up with brilliant technologies at very, very low cost. And I think the government and the private sector, of course, should kind of collaborate to ensure that, you kind of promote such innovation. So, and once you have tested that this is really something which will help, be it in terms of carbon capture, sequestration, and a whole lot of things, air quality, water quality, biodiversity conservation, wildlife conservation. You have a whole lot of technology being used for wildlife conservation these days to see the habitats of these critically endangered species and ensure that your conservation efforts are actually carried out in that fashion. And that is where you should kind of decide as to what is the kind of regulation that you want to have. So I'll stop at that, and then if there's more time, then we'll talk about it. Thank you.
No, as you were talking about a couple of things from an industry perspective, because I'm on the other side, what I can say is that a lot of regulations have come which were ahead of their times. And industry didn't have any option but to go and make a representation. Paper straws is a classic example. And then you made a very important point about there are people around who are able to help in India build up a lot of stuff around sustainability. I remember our R&D head telling us that there is an alternative to paper straw which is bamboo straw. It's made of bamboo and it's 100%. I don't think any country has explored this. So the government need to encourage such kind of things which are alternative to plastic and are sustainable. But really very informative. Thank you so much, Nawneet, for that. And your passion for sustainability laws comes through. Thank you. Moving on, Lakshmi, I have 2 questions for you again. How can you balance innovation and privacy in the face of unprecedented technological advancement in artificial intelligence? That's one. And AI's carbon footprint is rapidly growing. Please, would you shed light on the opportunities and challenges that this presents for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayur. I would start by first, making a statement where I draw parallels between artificial intelligence and humans, because one creates the other. And now we also see scenarios where the other seems to dominate, humans. So like humans, I think artificial intelligence is also very paradoxical in the sense that from a human rights perspective, it both threatens, the advancement of further inequalities, and at the same time, it is used extensively in order to promote human rights. in the context of human rights, I think one of the biggest topics extensively discussed is in the areas of data privacy, data transparency, data governance, and the other important aspect which is also extensively talked about is employment, because there's always this constant fear and threat that artificial intelligence will start displacing people from their jobs. So I'll first start by talking about data privacy and data governance, because those are extremely relevant, and especially with the requirements of explainable AI, and that gathering a lot of momentum and a lot of research being done in order to bridge the gap between what is called as opaque algorithmic decision making vis-a-vis the need to ensure that there is clear transparency. I think that's what's driving a lot of research around explainable AI. Now, if I have to shed some light, I'd like to talk about 3 specific use cases. The first being that of how artificial intelligence and facial recognition is used in smart city projects. So I represent a technology company, and in Hewlett Packard Enterprise, we have had the privilege of working with the public sector in around close to 70 odd smart city projects. We've deployed facial recognition in those projects, and I will like to highlight how it has been used both in order to drive efficiencies in management of a city, and how it has also presented certain surveillance risks. So when you deploy a solution like smart traffic management, what essentially a company like ours would do is set up a data center, a command and control center, where we monitor how the traffic is moving in different parts of the city. So just to ensure that you decongest the city with, traffic clogging, etc. But while this has been proven to be very advantageous and very helpful in cities like Bhopal, or you look at cities like Dehradun, the flip side of, deploying facial recognition is that oftentimes, governments want to use the data for purposes beyond what it has intended to use it for. So while it's supposed to help with traffic management, sometimes our project managers get requests saying that, can we use the data that you get also to monitor how our drivers who drive state transport buses, how they are functioning? And they use it to track drivers' absenteeism, their attendance. So the data is clearly being solicited for purposes beyond what it is intended. And that's where we see a deficiency even in the regulation. Okay. At the same time, I would say that smart traffic management has significantly helped cities like Thane, Bhopal, Dehradun. And the positive thing also is that it is used, we've used it extensively for tracking crime, right? What's fascinating is even there, it acts as a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, it is used to say, like during the COVID pandemic, it was, facial recognition was used extensively to map containment zones. So these smart city projects, in fact, doubled up for even, stepping in to perform these sort of services, which was not part of the project. But we were monitoring containment zones. We were also additionally asked to do things like, monitor crime activity in certain areas. So countries like Argentina, for instance, has perhaps taken a lead where they've realized the potential of AI, and they've used it to reduce crime in certain areas, right? But the flip side is, all the surveillance equipment that's deployed is monitoring the faces of individuals, and in a way, it's being used for purposes beyond the scope. Recently, we got a very peculiar request from a local law enforcement agency where they wanted to, they wanted to investigate a bomb scare. And in connection with that, they sought a whole lot of data from us with no specific time frame or time reference. So it was like an unrestricted demand for flow of data. So those sort of demands sometimes can prove to be fairly daunting, because that there's no regulation, there's nothing regulating it, and it's very difficult when you're dealing with either law enforcement or with the government to say no to them, right? So that's where regulation plays, I think, a very critical role. The other, important use case I'd just like to talk about is how artificial intelligence is used in the admission process in universities. So there was a study done on how AI can prove to be a huge game changer in the admission process, because you can identify the best talent and people who bring in perhaps the best and highest rate of success if they get admitted into a university, right? At the same time, the same technology can even perpetuate biases and can, in fact, enhance the chances of inequalities, because the historic data that is used to input the AI training model or the tool is historic data which will perhaps have data which prefers one particular race, one particular group of people, or perhaps prefers a certain kind of student. So that in a way is already perpetuating bias. So that's why I said it's like a double-edged sword. So you can use it to your benefit, and it also has the potential for backfiring. Niti Aayog has come up with a set of principles for deployment of responsible AI. There are two important considerations that they have kept in mind. One is from a societal perspective, and the other is from a system perspective. The reason I talk about both these aspects is because the government is already taking such a decisive role in taking it forward. In fact, last year in the GPAI summit, which took place here in Delhi, what it fortified was the government's stance in terms of bringing together governments and private sector entities, researchers, and academicians to come up with a sort of strong policy or a commitment to drive trusted stewardship when it comes to AI governance. So in that sense, there's already a firm commitment that's being seen from the government side. And they know that this partnership will not work without the support of the extended community, because it's going to be used by both sides. So that's very important to take note of. Why I talk about the government's commitment is because right now there is a gap in what is happening in terms of responsible development and responsible deployment. Now these two things are very different. Responsible development becomes very critical because you need to ensure that the data that goes into any AI training model is not biased, right? And how do you ensure that? One, by ensuring there's proper training given to your technologists, ensuring that there is a fair representation of people from different groups so that whatever data they put into an AI training model represents a wider audience set. So your data is not underrepresented. The other thing is to bring this topic as a boardroom conversation, because in more and more organizations, especially when you're deploying artificial intelligence, there is very little thought given to what is our AI strategy, why are we deploying it, what is the outcome that you want from it, right? And how much data will you use in order to bring your AI training model together. So these are some very important questions to dwell into. The other and last aspect on the first question that I want to complete by saying is, for responsible AI, there has to be also a cognitive bias test that is applied to ensure that people who come and work on these technologies are not biased. Very, very important to sensitize people about it, because I think that's where there is a huge gap. And to make governments also responsible and bring in the right kind of regulation. On the second question you asked, I'll just like to talk about how our organization is dealing with sustainability and, with, especially from the perspective of new technologies in the context of AI. The first would be, so Hewlett Packard Enterprise currently has a sustainability goal of a net zero target for 2040. But this is going to be so difficult to achieve. And while it sounds very rosy and sounds very ideal, we understand that it's going to be a very arduous journey. And why I say that is because we already have servers and storage and computing devices which are manufactured from a sustainability perspective. So when we sell our products and we deploy, especially edge to cloud computing services where we provide or lease our equipment so that people don't have to buy it and all of that, which again increases carbon footprint, we give them sustainability dashboards so that they are able to monitor their consumption, energy consumption, carbon footprint, costs. Right? These are the three most driving factors while making any decision regarding investment in technology. So this is something that our organization does. Apart from that, I also just want to quickly highlight that at HPE, one of the interesting things we do is we also believe in upcycling our technology products, which is one of the coolest things we do. So I've visited one of our factories, and a lot of the used chips that we use, especially for our servers and in some of our computing devices, they all get recycled, upcycled, and it's very cool to see. I would say that AI, especially in the sustainability sector, has been very fascinating in my view because, you know, like in the aviation industry, you look at like data centers, like companies like ours, we support a lot of data centers, and those are very fascinating places, but they emit the highest amount of, you know, greenhouse gases, equivalent to that of the aviation industry. American Airlines, for instance, they have in fact introduced, you know, AI primarily to monitor vapor trails, right? Which again contributes significantly to your, you know, to global warming. It's used obviously for predictive analysis like floods, earthquakes, other pandemics, etc. But what is most fascinating is the final takeaways when you look at how you can use or deploy AI sustainably. So just a few takeaways to conclude. One, it's very important to first see whether you really need artificial intelligence embedded in a technology, because you don't need it for everything. So it's very important to have a clear strategy because you don't need to embed it. Second is to use solar energy or to use other forms of green energy while developing AI, because the biggest problem with models like ChatGPT 3 and 4 is even just to answer 15 to 20 questions, it takes 500 ml of a bottle of water. Right? So again, a lot of water consumption. Like Google, for instance, they admitted to the fact that when they were developing their large language model, they ended up spending close to 1 million liters of water. In their justification, they said that, you know, we only use wastewater, we don't use any fresh water, we use seawater. But, you know, they now have a commitment to replenish that water, you know, by 2020, to around 120% by 2030. So companies are also increasingly becoming, you know, conscious of this. And last but not the least, I would say that to deploy AI in a sustainable fashion, it's also important to look at where you're going to deploy it. Because if you deploy it in a warmer country, like an Asian country, the amount of water consumption is just going to go through the roof. Whereas when you deploy it in countries like the US or slightly colder countries like Canada, the water consumption is less. So it's very important to keep these factors in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi, on this. By the way, as you were talking as an in-house counsel, I was just wondering how different our fields are. When you visit a factory, you see a chip. When I visit a factory, I probably see chips. Pretty different, you know. Yeah. So moving on, we have Tejus here. Tejus, I have been a client of Tejus. Tejus is an expert in tax laws, customs, indirect taxes, GST and all. So welcome, Tejus. And you know, let's see how tax fits into the scheme of discussion that we are having now. So my question to you is, in light of the pressing need to do more on environmental conservation, do you believe that tax policies can actually play a role in to push sustainable practices, or is it more like a regulatory affair with no involvement of tax policies there?
Yeah, thank you, Mayur. So you've raised a very pertinent question, and I'm really delighted to share my thoughts on it. See, largely we all know that environmental sustainability and economic growth, you know, it's like walking a tightrope. And howsoever difficult it is, in the present climatic condition that we are in, it is equally important, and we all understand that, right? And in that, tax can definitely play a very significant role. Now, why significant role? Because largely for a country like India, consumer behavior pattern are not related, relatively they are not focused on the greener technology, right? And at the same time, even for the industry, they are unaware of the benefits which they can reap by adopting greener technologies, you know, in future, or even today also, largely they are unaware, right? So in a country like us, it is very important for the government to play that role and to use tax as a tool to ensure that such behavioral patterns can be changed, right? For instance, a very simple example could be electric vehicles, right? By reducing tax on the electric vehicles, what happens? As a consumer, I will be excited to, buy that product because now it is, on a pricing and it is perhaps on a similar range or maybe at a lesser range. And therefore, it is, building a culture in me to perhaps give preference to that product, right? And which of course will then boost production of electric vehicles, right? So that is how it is used as a catalyst, to build that behavioral patterns in the consumer and in the, for the industry as a whole. Now, largely today, there are three main measures which are adopted by the government to use this tool to ensure the environmental sustainability. Number one, to give benefits to products by way of reducing or slashing the tax rates, right? For instance, there are, exemptions which are being offered to solar panels or to, renewable batteries and so on and so forth. So that is one measure which is adopted, or maybe on the services end also, lesser tax is payable on the waste management services and so on and so forth. So in the entire, business cycle or the supply chain cycle, whatever is related to renewables, whatever is related to waste management, whatever is related to transportation where there can be less use of fossil fuel, that is something where government is endeavoring today to reduce the tax cost. So that is one measure which is typically adopted.
So you mean to say there's a conscious effort which is being made already?
Absolutely. The other effort which is equally important is to offer incentives, direct incentives. Now, the first measure which we saw is to reduce the tax cost. The other is to offer incentive directly to the industry. So which means that, one typical example could be PLI scheme, right? Under which scheme, if you make investment in, say, solar sector, then you will be awarded certain benefits from tax perspective. Other benefits are also available, but tax also plays a very important role in it, right? So that is the other measure through which government is trying to push for environmental sustainability. And third and the last measure which is typically adopted is to ensure that higher tax burden is posed on something which is not green, right? So which is not fostering any greener technology. Like while in India we do not have a concept of carbon tax yet, globally you will see many countries imposing carbon tax, which means that there is a tax which is levied clearly on the basis of CO2 emissions, right? Which is not presently in India. It will come in future. It is not in existence at present, but it is, in the course of discussion when it comes to the government bodies and all. Yet what I was saying is that there is no carbon tax. However, to ensure that fossil fuels such as petroleum, etc., are not consumed the way they used to be consumed, in the past. So petroleum rates, tax rates, if you see, are on a very high end today, right? And, for coal, we have coal compensation cess, right? So all of these levies are, in a way, indirect ways of imposing that carbon tax, right? So these are the three measures which are typically adopted today to ensure that we are moving towards an environmentally sustainable era. The question remains is, are they sufficient enough? In a country like us, we are perhaps, at number 3 when it comes to CO2 emissions worldwide. So whether it is sufficient for us or not is one will have to think. And at the same time, one will also have to think that whether, if we are adopting that path of being environmentally sustainable, whether we will hamper our economic growth. For instance, today EU has come up with a concept of a carbon mechanism where, what will happen is that today, for their local domestic manufacturing, of course, there are taxes which are being imposed on the basis of CO2 emissions. Now, when you export something to an EU country, there will be an equal levy on an exporter as well, on the basis of their CO2 emissions. So for instance, from India, if we are exporting something to an EU country, then we will have to buy a particular certificate in order to ensure that we are also contributing equally to environmental sustainability. Now the question which comes here is, will that make our exports less competitive? Of course it will make. Then how do we balance between economic growth and to ensure that exports are not getting hampered? At the same time, for a country like us, we do not even have a proper mechanism to do this computation of how much CO2 emissions, etc., are being done by a particular industry. So there are, I mean, we are lagging a way behind when it comes to, accurately seeing as to how much is the emission and how much, pollutant is being, sent into the air, right? So that is so. What I'm trying to say is that it is very important to see whether what we are doing presently is sufficient or not. At the same time, there are several other factors also. So on the one hand, say government is proposing to offer benefits to renewables. But on the other hand, tax, there are several issues. There are classification issues, there are, multiple legal issues which are going on, right? For instance, in the solar sector itself, what is a solar generating system and what is a solar generator itself becomes a big issue. So on the one hand, you are giving the benefit, while on the other hand, you are taking. So government has to go all hearts in it, when it comes to tax matters. To give you another example, there's a payment which is being made by the companies to a particular authority called CAMPA. That payment is made for the purposes of afforestation. Now, and that is to be made because if you have done deforestation, then it is your responsibility to ensure that you are contributing in afforestation, which of course industry is doing. But there's a huge litigation going on presently. There are investigations going on by the DGGSTI authorities that whether this amount which is going for afforestation is actually liable to GST or not. So there are various such complications when it comes to tax. So government must ponder upon those complications also to resolve those complications. There are complications of rate resolutions. For instance, if you wish to promote domestic industry to manufacture renewable products. At the same time, if we are, in order to promote domestic industry, if we are imposing higher duties on imported products, which is good, but then it has it may have severe consequences that if we do not have enough domestic capability, then how do we ensure that environmental sustainability in terms of, promoting renewables and so on and so forth. So these are few thoughts which are important to know. In nutshell, tax has always been used not only in India, but otherwise also globally as one of the very, very important tool to ensure that, as a society, we all are moving towards, environmentally sustainable, thought process.
Thank you, Tejas, for that. I'd never thought about sustainability from a tax perspective. I mean, there are a lot of things which are happening. I was reading recently that India plans to be an exporter of green hydrogen in times to come, not only just a manufacturer, but a huge exporter. And the latest thing that I read is that solar panels are going to be installed on water so that it takes up less space, So a lot of innovations are coming, but these will not help unless the tax benefits are there. It's long time since I've stopped wearing a tax hat, so I don't keep thinking about these things, but thanks for these things. We need to just speeden up a bit because I think we are lacking in terms of time, so sorry. But Kamal, moving on to you, my question to you is, how do you balance between innovation, use of AI, and the challenges, the risks around it, privacy, ethics, and bias?
I'm going to confine my thoughts to use of AI in law for lawyers only. Today, I can share that I use AI for a number of things. Myself and also, the lawyers of our firm use AI in various situations. For example, we use AI for legal research. I can ask the technology to point me to the absolutely relevant precedents. Not only does it tell me what relevant precedents are there, it also tells me and rather warns me not to use some precedents which are not being treated in a positive way by the courts. Similarly, if I have a very complicated judgment or a complicated agreement, I can ask the technology to summarize it for me. Or I could just ask pointed questions, what are the obligations of both parties in this, according to this agreement. Similarly, I could also ask the technology to extract information for me. I can point it again to, I need to know what is in this agreement under assignment, under liability, under indemnity, etc. There are so many ways that, technology, AI-enabled technology is being used by me and the lawyers in our firm. Similarly, I could, again, for instance, ask the technology to generate a draft of an agreement after learning from the various agreements that I have drafted. So my own knowledge, and then the technology is capable of generating a new draft by learning from my previous drafts. I can also ask questions. Like I said, I gave an example of, what are the obligations of both the parties here. Now, is it as easy as, plug and play, go to the market, explore, find out what is available, and then just bring it on? No, there are, it's a whole exercise, it's very logically, very scientifically done to figure out what is the best, what are the use cases, what are the right technologies, what are the risks involved. And when I talk about using all of this, I really think that it'll be a shame if our lawyers, by getting scared or by worrying about the challenges associated with AI, stop or just refrain from using AI. It's great. I can say that from my own personal experience, first-hand experience, that it's great. It's a great technology. It's great enabler. Makes me more productive, makes me more efficient. But like the other panelists said, that the accountability continues to be mine. So like you use your phone and even when you type a message and the your phone is suggesting various words in a sentence, it's kind of reading your mind. You say how and it says are you, but you decide, right? You might be just saying how are you doing, it just says how are you. So you decide, right, whether you accept that prompt or not. That's exactly what you have to do when you are using AI-enabled technologies in your day-to-day work. So like I said, it'll be a shame if lawyers refrain themselves from using technology, saying that there are too many risks involved. We are very good at pointing out problems. What about the solutions? So like the challenges, we've got challenges around privacy. I mean, it's not a secret. Everybody knows about privacy, where private information, confidential information, privileged information may just go out on the internet. Similarly, there are ethics issues where the technology is capable of hallucination, is capable of making cases or making up information, which it will tell you with so much confidence that it, to you it appears to be truth. But again, the accountability lies on the user, so therefore you have to know whether that's correct or not. And I'll give you an example of when we were writing law papers, our law exams. We had to write really lengthy answers for each question. And it was a technique taught to us by our seniors and then maybe passed on from us to our juniors, that just you could also make up a few cases, in your answers. You could just say Kamal Gupta versus Union of India and get away thinking that, the invigilator, the person who's marking you will not notice, and it's the length of the answers that will matter. That's pretty much what ChatGPT is also doing when it makes up cases. But we can't get away with that as a lawyer because every filing is happening in our name. I can't go to the court saying that I use ChatGPT or whatever else, and so please excuse me. I can't do that. So the accountability lies on me. Similarly, about biases, Lakshmi gave an example. I'm going to restrict myself to law, where lots of judges have tried worldwide using AI to decide bail matters, including our own Punjab and Haryana High Court, wanting to know the worldwide view from ChatGPT on bail. Now, what happens here is, again, that not ChatGPT, any technology, any AI technology has been trained on previous judgments, right? So when it says, okay, should Kamal be granted bail? If the answer is yes or no, not necessary that the technology has given a wrong answer, because it's only going to give you the answer based on the training it has been given. But what if the previous judgments were biased? What if it was against a particular race community? The same example that Lakshmi gave, and in that case, you can't really prevent the bias, because that is what is historical data, and you can't create new data, right? So the past data that you are training the technology on is going to be biased, and therefore the technology is biased, not the technology's fault. So, like I said, we can't just keep on listing the problems. We have to find a solution to those problems. So at least I can say that when I'm looking at technologies, I am looking at various risks. I'm looking at where the servers are, where the data is going to be located, where, is my data getting deleted? Is my data going to be used for other people's advantage? Your other clients will also get the learning of my data or not. I will involve the InfoSec team to make sure that, whatever I can't see, they can, because they come with a different lens to, deep dive into the technology vendors' infrastructure, etc. And finally, I would say that, as lawyers, like I said, we must use technology. We should not, stay away from using technology, but we should use it responsibly. And for technology to do wonders, to not become, the risks involved should not become an obstacle in the way of innovation. I think it's important for all the stakeholders to come together. Lawyers, policymakers, the judiciary, including the technology vendors as well. Everybody needs to come together for the responsible use and responsible regulation of AI.
Thank you so much, Kamal, for that. And I met you quite recently. And I was very intrigued by your title, Chief Innovation Officer. In an organization like mine, a Chief Innovation Officer would be an R&D head. So I was just wondering, and I spoke to you, and very informative, the kind of role that you play. So nice knowing you and what you do. Moving on to our last panelist for the day, for this session. Vani, thank you for being here. I know you had been traveling. I know you are probably sleepy, but thank you for being here. And my question to you is, how do you see the existing sustainability laws relevant for the Indian market today, how they are?
I'm very well aware that I'm the last panelist and we've already overshot on time. I'll try to make myself as crisp as possible. And I think firstly, when it comes to sustainability, there are a couple of things that I would like to speak about, especially the organization that I represent. That, from a GE Aerospace perspective, we talk about new technologies coming into sustainability, be it looking at reducing the carbon footprint. And worldwide, we are committed to having a zero emission rate by 2050, which what Lakshmi mentioned, is a very ambitious stance. But then the fact is that once you take a pledge as an organization, you make a commitment, you go back and make a blueprint that you commit across multiple continents across the world, working with different jurisdictions, different regulators as to how you're going to implement it. And India being a very big market for aerospace across the world, we are touted to be the third largest users of aerospace going forward. So with the growth that we see in this space, the company is actively pursuing sustainable aviation fuel. We're already in our first test on that, and I think one of the first flights have already been launched very successfully in collaboration with one of the airlines. Now, coming to sustainability and the rule of law, I would like to say the role of lawyers is extremely important over here. I think firstly, we are the natural crusaders of law. We are the ones who uphold constitutional rights, not only for individuals, but for areas of law and areas which affect our society, which no one else champions. So naturally, we are the ones who are leading it by example. It is a lot of responsibility on all of us as lawyers to do that. We are what I would call myself a public enforcement officer. Even within organizations, we are looked upon as the voice of law to guide our managements, guide our leadership, guide societies, organizations to do the right thing. And also to, very importantly, to guide our judiciary to take the important things. We have such an esteemed panel of not only internal, in-house lawyers, but also external lawyers who represent us, clients like us, and many more, who uphold the rule of law. Rule of law is what is the basic difference between civilizations. From the time we've started and our evolution as humanity, if we look, we have championed causes which nobody really thought about, and sustainability is one of them. Sustainability, especially when it comes to India, we have always been a civilization and a country which has looked at very sustainable ways of living. It is with the, change in society, change in evolution, westernization, that we sort of adopted so many things that we originally never needed to. And now when you look at that simple concept, we are taking a U-turn in a lot of ways. Like I think I remember very vividly as a child having a cloth bag and going to the vegetable market with my mom. And today we pay 20 rupees to buy that same cloth bag. Now, are we making a U-turn? Yes, we are. We're going back to where we started. And I think that is what is required when you look at sustainability. The approach of law has also to address the changes that have taken place, be it in use of carbon footprints, be it in use of plastics, be it in use of different regulation that we have. Now, the point is that when we are looking at ourselves in various industries, we are also looking at societies, at jurisdictions which have come up with very strong laws to enforce sustainability. And we do admit to the fact that India is in a lot of ways lagging behind that. And we are lagging behind, not that we choose to do it, because we've never been to an extent of use of, I would say, technology the way West has been. Electric vehicles have come into India in the last 7 to 8, 10 years. They've been using it for the last 15, 20 years. So they know what technology has led them to and what are the issues they need to resolve. Now, that is an advantage and a disadvantage for India at this point of time, because we know what is the laws we need to correct what the West is facing. And there is where we're in a unique position to fill the gap. We know the laws. We have gone ahead and we've got our regulators in over-enthusiasm at times pass the laws. But we do not have the infrastructure. We do not have the people in the system who understand the laws and who are willing to walk that path to guide. And simple example, corporate governance. We've all got the public listed top 100 making the disclosures. We've all got the committees in place, but how many of our managements, our leadership really understand the disclosures? Is it just a tick in the box, or do we have the right departments to address it? Like, I don't think maybe 5 to 8 years back we had a sustainability department in any organization. Today we've got sustainability officers, and somehow by default the General Counsel was always a sustainability officer. It was a role given to us because I go back to what I said, we are looked as the natural crusaders, the champions of law in areas where none exist. So I think there's a lot of responsibility on people in this room, people on this dais, to carry on with that voice, help organizations become aware. And I would not like to further elaborate to what my esteemed panelists have already mentioned in various fields, including yourself, Mayur, that what all we are doing to help educate the leadership, business community, as well as the regulators, and making sure that we continue contributing in the right fashion, in the right manner on sustainability laws in India. I'd like to stop at that.
Thank you so much. Because of the passion for the subject that we were discussing, we have overshot the time a bit, but thank you so much for your participation and your thoughts. Really appreciate it. Thank you.